Hey, everybody. It is 7 o'clock in the East. It is 4 o'clock in the West. And this is your Tuesday, June 27th edition of the strategy session from Resolute Square. Joining me tonight are the one, the only, the author of Everything Trump Touches Dies and host of the Enemies List podcast, Rick Wilson. Rick, welcome.
Reed, how are you? Good to see you back in the country.
Good to be back. And as always, joining us from a secret undisclosed location, longtime political ad man and author of It Was All a Lie, Stuart Stevens. Stuart, welcome.
I'm glad you tested that open borders policy and they let you back in.
Yeah, well, listen, we got 18 months to figure out whether or not that's a long-term play for me. So, all right, guys. So it's yet another busy week. In 3.5 or maybe 8 years of busy weeks. The big news today politically is that the United States Supreme Court ruled against a conservative effort to basically say that state legislatures can decide how and if they will accept the outcome of federal elections. This was something that we saw in the aftermath, Rick, of the 2020 election when John Eastman, among others, and Cleta Mitchell, who we'll hear from in just a second, basically wanted to say that under the elections clause of the United States Constitution, which says the time and conducting of elections is left up to the states and the legislatures, the right-wing MAGA anti-democratic folks basically taking that to its furthest extreme, saying, well, now we can decide not only how elections are held, who can participate, but also if we don't like the outcome, maybe we'll decide how to change that too.
Right. It's this fantasy bubble of alternative law to join alternative facts, where they really look at they look at John Eastman as a constitutional giant who could decide these kind of things as opposed to a moron who I wouldn't trust to fix a speeding ticket. And so you ended up with a Supreme Court case today where only Thomas and Gorsuch voted in favor of it, which on this Supreme Court is saying a lot.
Well, can I just, Rick, before you go on, can I just say one thing? As someone who spent 10 years in California politics as a quote unquote normal Republican back then, and it was like Arnold Schwarzenegger and 8 more of us in the entire state, was that like Eastman was heralded out there as like this constitutional giant, right? Like everybody deferred to, John Eastman's coming to the event. Like I didn't know who he was. And then he showed up and it was like some other nerd, like of all the nerds that, appear at these things. But Stuart, so, it was a 6-3 decision. Amy Coney Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh sided with, Roberts, who's sort of the 50-50 guy at this point, but also with the liberal justices on the court. So now is MAGA or Donald Trump and all the Republican goons going to say that the Supreme Court's now part of the deep state?
Yeah. So look, I think this falls in the category of yes, it's good that it lost, but this is a beachhead of legal theory that has now been validated by a third of the Supreme Court that would revolutionize what it means to be a citizen in the United States. And beneath the surface here, the same group that pushed, starting in 1984 when they had that little weekend gathering that became the Federalist Society, they were very patient, and look what we ended up now with in the Supreme Court. The same group, run by Leonard Leo, which now has the largest donation in the history of American politics, $1.6 billion. This is their focus, to change the legal structure that would enable these obscure theories like this to become law. So you say, okay, it's 2023, this didn't. So maybe this is equivalent of what with the Federalist Society? 1990? They're very patient.
Yeah.
And every weekend out there, there is a group that is meeting quietly, pushing this theory. They're working to elect local election officials that agree with it, to put volunteers in place. And it is just one of their efforts to do one of the essential things when a democracy goes into autocracy, which is to change the legal structure to give it a justification.
So, Rick, I want to play a clip. Sam, can you cue this up for us? From our friend Lauren Windsor at the Undercurrent. She released this back in April. Let's go ahead and have a look at this, and then I want you to walk us through it.
Let me just say this. Whenever anybody starts telling you that they're worried about democracy or protect democracy or they've got democracy in their name, those are not friends of ours. Because we live in a constitutional republic, not a democracy. They want it to be a democracy, to change our founders' intent.
Okay, so Rick, a couple of things there. One, the woman speaking there is a woman named Cleta Mitchell, who is a longtime Republican conservative lawyer. She is also the person.
Well, she was my election attorney for a long time.
Okay, she's also the person who will probably be indicted alongside Donald Trump in Georgia at some point later this summer, as she is the other voice on the phone call, on Trump's side of the phone call, from his infamous phone call to Brad Raffensperger, where he only needed 11,830 votes or whatever the number was. But Rick, as someone who has studied this group of people, you hear this a lot. We're not a democracy. We're a constitutional republic. And that is something that sort of goes over the head. To Stuart's point, it's a very like college GOP kind of weekend party thing, right? About having these things. But
right.
Tell us
Dorm
what
room bullshit session kind of.
But tell us why it is a dangerous thing, to Stuart's point, for this to even get a hearing at a level of the Supreme Court. What does that mean? What is when they say constitutional republic? What are they saying to us?
What they're really saying, what they're really showing, is the fact that our founders did imagine America as a confederation, a constitutional republic of the several states, as they called it back then. Mm. But what these people are leaving out is based on democratic principles, based on a system that is not an autocracy, not a dictatorship. And what they're really trying to say is they've departed from the old conservative model of the best power is local power. They think now everything should be centralized at the top, and they should be able to do what they want in every state. And that in this further divorced the state elections decisions and executive decisions from any kind of legal scrutiny. The case was a shit show from the top to the bottom, from an attorney I spoke with today about it. And I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to pretend to understand every nuance of this thing. But the idea was give the states at the executive level every bit of power and not allow any sort of court scrutiny of anything to do with elections, with the belief that you'll have 30 plus states that are going to be solidly red states in both houses and the governor at any given time, and you will be able to dominate American political life from top to bottom. This was a holy grail item for a lot of Republicans, and I think there's a lot of shock right now that they did not get what they wanted, and that, in fact, everyone but Gorsuch and Thomas ended up voting against this.
Well, I mean, but Stuart, a couple of things. One is, when you say the words constitutional republic, right? The Constitution is a piece of paper. And for a bunch of people who consider themselves so originalist in their thinking, they are always absolutely willing to ascribe any belief that they have to it, to the founders. To Rick's point, like they did not believe that the Constitution was something that was supposed to be tyrannical in nature. In fact, that's why we had the whole 1775 thing, Lexington and Concord in the first place. But it seems now that, they want the piece of paper to say and mean what they want it to say, as opposed to what the intent is. And it's always interesting when they bring the founders into it, because, I think they believe, and, maybe with some justification, that if they invoke the founders somehow, to Rick's earlier point, it gives it some sort of legitimacy.
Well, this all goes back to a discussion in the Federalist Papers, where this issue is debated, whether or not, what is the intent of the power of the legislature. So when you get as I like to think of him, Reed, your senator, Mike Lee.
He is my senator.
you're,
So doesn't believe in democracy.
If you remember, one of the many sort of absurd moments in the vice presidential debate last time, besides a fly landing on his head,
The fly.
was Mike Lee tweeting out in the middle of the debate with full caps and his best sort of Trumpian heritage. We are a republic, not a democracy. And it is really like all conspiracy theories. It has a grain of truth. So you could have, and they do have debates about this, like an Oxford Union debate. Resolved, is the United States of America a republic or a democracy?
Right.
But the totality of the intent of the Constitution, to go what you're saying, I think is, not me, but I think the consensus far and away is the intent of it, which has been the basis for the expansion of the franchise to vote consistently.
Right.
So, I mean, to take it at its face value, when the Constitution was passed, the only people who could vote were land-owning white men.
Right.
Is that what the Constitution intended? We have decided as a society that's not what the Constitution intended, that women should be able to vote, that African Americans should be able to vote, that people who don't own land should be able to vote. That is sort of, when we go to the arc of history, that is the bend of the arc of history. Mm-hmm. They want to bend it the other way.
Right.
And at the root of this is the reality that America is becoming a minority-majority country. So, no one has ever tried to change the rules of a game they are winning. It's sort of,
right.
Base.
That's right.
So they can't say we only want white people of a certain stature to vote. So you have to say, well, we think this is the original intent of the Federalist Papers. That sounds much better. Like you can say that in public settings, and people don't call you like a lunatic and a racist.
Well, but Stuart, shouldn't we take them at their word then? Which is, if the original intent of the founders, to your point, was that only white property owning males could vote, and the only real mention of slaves in the Constitution is the 3/5 compromise, by which white slave-owning Southerners got to use them as population, right, to increase the South's representation. Their intent, if they're so bent on what the original intent of the founders was, like, that is pretty scary all by itself.
Yeah, well, so, what do you think if you gave Mike Lee some truth serum and woke him up in the middle of the night, he'd say?
Yeah.
He'd probably say that 3/5 went too far.
Yeah.
So, I think that, what we can't allow this is to be sort of thrown on the lunatic microchip and vaccine sort of conspiracy nuttiness, because there are really serious people who believe this, and they're very patient people.
Right.
And, these are the people, again, that started out to change the court system. They did it legally. There are only 5 Supreme Court justices in the history of America that have been confirmed by senators who represent a minority of the voting public population of the United States. And all 5 are on the Supreme Court today. 3 of those were appointed by Donald Trump, who lost a popular vote. 2 of them were appointed by George Bush, who in his second term, when he won the popular vote, but none of us who worked in that Bush campaign in 2004 would really argue that he would have won if he hadn't running for re-election when he lost the popular vote. So you can make a case that 5 were appointed by, well, it's a fact, 5 were appointed by presidents who lost the popular vote. So you get a minority of the minority, which is really what is happening increasingly and is going to happen. And nothing's going to be able to stop this, because really no one is talking about changing. And I'm probably not a good case for it. 2 senators for every state, right?
Right. But just as an aside, Rick, if
you want to go back, though, it's the original intent.
Go ahead.
No,
well, let me just say. So you're going to have larger states are getting larger, And that's going to be a trend that just increases. So you're going to have an increasing disparity of the smallest state and the largest state. And the result is you're going to have increasingly the Senate represent a minority of the population of the United States.
But wasn't that always the point? Wasn't that always the point, that you were going to have the upper house that was going to have the equal, so that the small states, Wyoming, North Dakota, wherever, weren't going to get ramrodded by California and New York?
But the spread, I think, was 13 times the largest from the largest to the smallest when the Constitution was. And now, what is Wyoming to California?
Well, let's put it this way. Just when it comes to Los Angeles County is bigger than all, I think, but 10 states.
Yeah.
Right? So it's a whole different.
If Brooklyn was a state, it would be the 6th largest state in the country.
Right. So Rick, I want to talk a little bit about this because, to Stuart's point, and I want to use this as a segue into the faith and freedom insanity that happened this last week, where all the Republicans got up. But I want to stay on the Constitution and to Stuart's point about, the original intent. Okay. Well, the original intent of the Constitution also was that it was changeable, difficult, but doable. And it's been done, 26 times, 27 times. And, the 14th Amendment is maybe the most important amendment since the original 10, in the wake of the Civil War. It's become what we know as the Equal Protection Clause. That I believe, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, would also instituted birthright citizenship, because now you suddenly had slaves who had no legal status and their children who had no legal status.
That was perfect.
But if they had been born in this country, that was what ensured it. And to your point, it's also what you see Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, and I don't know how many other Republican candidates and elected officials out now saying, no more. Just being born here does not make you a citizen. And it really is an offense, to my mind, of the fact that this is the great propositional nation. It's the great nation that doesn't count your DNA or your religion or your ethnic origin and whether you're a citizen or not. It doesn't it doesn't decide if you're from the right village or the wrong village. It just says, if you come here and your children are born here, they are citizens. This was a way that it was an elegant and smart solution in the post-slavery environment. And it also has been this beacon that the world has seen for generations that has brought brilliant, hardworking people to these shores. And yes, the unsubtle racism of the Republican Party of today is to say, we don't want those brown people whose kids were born here to have citizenship. I guarantee you, if you're down in Sunny Isles, Miami, where there's an industry where Russians fly their pregnant wives and girlfriends to America to have their babies in Miami on Sunny Isles, there's a hospital in Sunny Isles, in Miami near Sunny Isles, where they speak Russian primarily in the OBGYN. They are going to be fine with that. If these kids were coming from Norway, they'd be fine with it. Or Sweden, they'd be fine with it. But somehow, mysteriously, if they're from Latin America or Asia or Africa, oh no, they can't be U.S. citizens being born here because they're somehow genetically different. It's not even a subtle amount of racism now. It's a full-throated flamethrower of it, and it's a disgusting reflection on what they believe America to be. This is again. We were always a propositional nation. We were always an idea, not a DNA set.
Well, Stuart, the other part too is white people don't have babies anymore in this country. Not what we need, right? We're
way below replacement.
Yeah, look, we're not South Korea, which is at 0.78 when of the replacement theory or replacement number when you need 2.1 kids, right? But
you need 1.6 to stay even.
Right. And so, Stuart, this is where you sort of get like the, 1930s authoritarian ideology, which is like, Albert Einstein came up with relativity, but he's Jewish, so we're not going to count it in physics kind of stuff. Like the economics and the demographics of the country depend on more people being here, by more little kids becoming big kids and working in America, right? And so it's like, no, we want this hollowed out, empty, old white guy nation, right? It's just, I'm a middle-aged white guy and I don't freaking get it.
Yeah, so I don't think we talk enough about this. There is, at the root of this is racism, like Rick has said, like you're both saying.
Like your book says.
And there is an entire industry of journalists who seem dedicated to studying this and come up for reasons to call it something other than racism, that to call it economic anxiety. It's like the best journalists in America were assigned to figure out why men go to strip clubs. You know, we really don't need this. We can just say it is racism. Right. But somehow this has not become acceptable. Right. And you're absolutely right that if these people coming to America, if there was another, 1 out of every 4 Swedes came to America, if that happened again, they'd be fine. Trust me. You know, just pause for a second and think about 1980, when a lot of us were attracted to the Republican Party. Ronald Reagan announced in front of the Statue of Liberty, and his last speech that he gave was an ode, as a president, was an ode to immigration. Mm-hmm. He signed a bill that made everyone in the country legal as of 1986, I think.
Right. Right.
Yes, I believe that's right.
And they're actually, in one of the more sort of mind-exploding moments, if you ever want to cruise through YouTube, there is a fairly heated argument between him and George Bush in the 1980 Republican primary debate in New Hampshire over who was more liberal
on immigration.
On immigration.
Yes. Right. It's actually a great clip.
You feel like, you know, this is why you shouldn't have done those drugs, because these things would happen to you when you see this.
But that was also, just as an aside, Stuart, that was also an example, however you feel about Ronald Reagan, however you feel about George H.W. Bush and their policy and even their ideology, they were governing conservatives. You might not have liked the way they governed. You might not have liked the things they did, but they had a governing ethos.
So you could argue with them. You could argue with them, and it was a fairly coherent. There were some problems. I mean, I think
supply side economics is what
he calls trickle down economics. Yeah, economics.
Art Laffer's still riding that gravy train 40 fucking years later.
But you could have a conversation. But you can't do this now. But you know, here's the reality, guys. We all know this, right? All the Stephen Millers in the world is not going to stop this from happening.
Right.
You know, all of these factors that we're talking about. America is going to become a minority-majority country. And the only question is, what form of government will America have as it becomes a minority-majority country? Because we're not going to change that demographic reality.
But I think this is an important thing because, Rick, I was nerding out on my vacation reading my Hannah Arendt, right, on revolution.
Only you would go on vacation and read Hannah Arendt.
I know. With my
a little more depressing.
No. It was great. This was actually more of her uplifting work, which is relative, but that's neither here nor there. But she spends a lot of time on the difference between the French Revolution and the American Revolution. Yep. And the American Revolution, again, given its time, was the idea that democracy meant not necessarily how you lived your private life, but the opportunity for citizens to be part of public life, whether or not that was voting. De Tocqueville always talked about how Americans loved to go to town hall meetings. They loved to go to city council meetings, whatever it was, because there was a conversation. It was fun. You saw your neighbors. And at the end of the day, you made a decision. Maybe you won, maybe you lost, but then you all walked off, right? These people want to take even that away. Not only do they want to take away the rights of your private lives, right, or your private life, the way you live your life, they also now want to say, and not only do we want to tell you how to live your life behind closed doors, we're going to tell you that we don't want to hear from you in the public square. We don't want to hear from you at the church. We don't want to hear from you at the town hall meeting.
You know,
in the ballot box, ultimately.
The idea of public resistance to authoritarianism just seems to grate and offend them at a level. Like, look, in Florida, Ron DeSantis has essentially banned the press from actually covering government. They've closed off as much as they can. They won't answer questions from reporters that aren't from their selected favorite little conservative sites. The freedom of information has been shut down. This isn't just Florida, it's across the board. They want to make the process where the public has a voice less and less impactful. There's one lobbyist in Tallahassee who's probably more powerful than 100 members of the legislature, who can get a phone call back anytime, who can get an answer to any question. But if a citizen does it, they can't. And so this idea that you diminish the power of people to address their government is really fundamental to a lot of where the Republican Party has transformed itself. They don't want you to know what they're doing. They don't want to have to be accountable. They don't want to have to let you know how they're going to vote on something or when they do something that has a conflict. All of it is corrosive. And a lot of the social change you see them pushing, to go back to what you said, is because they have a vision of what the country should be like. And let me tell you what they really, really want. When they say we want to ban abortion, they want more white babies. Now, if you want more white babies, God bless, go have more white babies. If you want more white babies, and to stop the population slide in America so you can stop immigration, or more babies overall in America, there's things you could do legislatively to make it easier for people to have a family. You could provide childcare. You could provide more medical benefits. All these things, they'll do anything that to get what they want, except the things that aren't about controlling your life. So they want to control your life, and they want to keep you from having the ability to redress your government. So this is because they have this incredibly this powerful antithesis of freedom and democracy, and it's also unconstitutional in a lot of ways as well. So what they're pushing is being done so aggressively because they know, to Stuart's point, the country's transforming underneath them. The baby boom generation is dying out. The solid core where and Stuart has these numbers that I've heard him say them before by heart. When you had Ronald Reagan won something like 68% of the white vote, and that number keeps staying the same basically, but the number of white voters keeps going down. It's upsetting them. It's pissing them off. They'll do anything to change this thing. It's like I'll do anything to get healthier except diet or exercise. It doesn't work.
When Ronald Reagan was elected, 60% of the electorate was non-college educated white people.
Yep.
That's the fastest declining percentage of the electorate of any large major group now. So now it's under 40%. And Mitt Romney lost with the same percentage of, it's actually smaller percentage of the white vote, a greater percentage of the white vote than Ronald Reagan had when he won a sweeping landslide in 1980. Yep. So Trump's coalition was 85% white in a country that is 60% white, and since we've been talking, it's become less so. Mm-hmm. And so look, the party that we belong to, it had a choice. It could have accepted this. It could have done what was necessary, which was hard, and ultimately, policy level, to do what appealed to these voters who were majority non-white, majority lower income or middle class. And the party just never did it. Instead, it went in this other direction. And a lot of us, I think in 2000, if you were involved in Bush and you really believed in compassionate conservatism, you never would have thought this would happen.
Well, yeah. Look, I was there. I go back to 1997 with the guys. So,
yeah.
We were
all wrong. And I don't know.
We were all wrong. But, Rick, I want to talk a little bit more about the faith and freedom thing, because there was the 14th Amendment, birthright citizenship, but also all of them from Trump on down, stepping over themselves and over each other, trying to make sure to this group of very, very evangelical voters, right-wing social voters, they weren't done. They're not done on abortion. Dobbs last year was a big win, but they're not done.
Dobbs for them was a warm-up act.
Right.
And no matter how bad it is for them, and I was interviewing somebody else today, and I was talking to them about, I'd had a conversation with a elected official in Florida, a evangelical conservative by any standard, who I spoke with over the weekend and said, I fought against Roe for a long time, but now I'm wondering if there are people who weren't in this for the right reasons. I'm like, oh, no shit.
No
because
shit.
he's worried about the
most of the people we worked with for the last 25 years.
Right, he's worried about the fact that a huge hospital in his district is losing its OBGYNs. They're not going to practice in Florida. They're leaving.
Right, or Texas.
He's worried about the rape and incest questions now, because these things aren't just edge cases that don't appear except once in a blue moon. They're much more common than they would think. And it fascinated me because you look at faith and freedom, and these are people who they want to take it much further than Dobbs, even though they understand at one level it's political poison. No matter how you feel about abortion, no matter how you think about the whether abortion is a moral complexity or a pure right, or whatever you think about abortion, politically speaking, Dobbs taught us that the Republicans had caught the car, they paid a price for it, but they're just going to keep pressing the button, going further and further to drive the Overton window out further and further. Next year, you're going to see a lot more bills to criminalize abortion, of doctors who advise women to get an abortion will
making it illegal to cross state lines.
Missouri being one of them. Cross state lines. You're going to see more efforts to monitor women's emails and social media traffic and internet access records to make sure they're not going on the wrong websites to find out about the crime of abortion.
Well, and Rick, I call this, I'm just making this up, so it's not going to be perfect, but I call this the sort of, Uber for state level authoritarianism, which is move fast and break things and let people sue me.
Yes. Well, and that's why they're going to try to ban birth control in some states. And people who look at that and go, oh, they'd never do that. They're going to try to ban gay marriage. They would never do that. Yes, they will. This is the same thing Planned Parenthood, for 40 years, they were told they're going to spend every penny they need to put conservative justices on every bench. They're going to roll over you. You can bitch and moan all you want, but unless you figure out how to fight them in the court level, not just because all your friends feel this way, if you think they will stop, they will not. They're going to try to ban gay adoption in Florida next year, and they're going to try to ban gay marriage. And they're going to do it by the back door and say, Obergefell was wrongly decided, blah, blah, blah.
Look, I mean, on gay marriage, I think it was last year sometime, Ken Paxton, the now impeached Attorney General of Texas, he's been under federal indictment for years, issued a letter saying that he did not believe that gay marriage was legal in Texas because it is not enshrined in the Texas Constitution. So what's going to happen now, and this is something that we're getting real nerdy, gang, here, is the Fifth Circuit, right, is in New Orleans. It is the MAGA circuit court of the federal appeals court. Someone will sue in Texas and say gay marriage is illegal, right? It will get adjudicated there. It will go to the Fifth Circuit, where they will say Obergefell was wrongly decided. Then it will go back to the Supreme Court, where, remember, it was Roberts who made sure that it got done the first time, right? And now you've got a 6-3 majority, and it's pretty easy to see, Stuart, how you could be 5-4 all day long.
Yeah, look, here's my feeling about...
because we shouldn't believe that these people won't tear the country in half culturally because they love to do it.
Look, here's my feeling about gay marriage. We, at one time, not very long ago, we hailed it as the most extraordinary social change as quickly in America. 2008, no presidential candidate, Democrat or Republican, supported same-sex marriage. You roll around to...
Even Obama at the beginning of 2012 hadn't come out and supported. It wasn't until then Vice President Biden was I think on Meet the Press, right?
Believe me, I was.
Oh, we're reading ahead. Sorry, Stuart.
I watched this when we were trying to decide what to do in the Romney campaign. 2020, it really wasn't an issue, but I think it is very much like what happened with Reconstruction, that Republicans never, for the most part, really accepted this. They just shut up about it because it became political poison to say it. So just once the history of rights movements in this country is once people have these rights and actually begin to use them, there's a move to push back. And this is what is happening with gay marriage. And this is what it's the hate and inordinate focus on trans members of our society, as if they were some great threat to civilization. It is a way to talk about it that you can have, I think, a legitimate debate about trans in athletics, right? I mean, this is something that's actually been going on for a long time. To have how you're going to test these things, but the hate and the vitriol and the inability to have a decent conversation about this is just a reflection of it. It is a way to get into expressing their desire to discriminate against anyone who's not heterosexual. Which is why they love Russia, because there's no gays in Russia.
Okay, well, perfect segue, Stuart. So yes, zooming out of faith and freedom and zooming back into what I will call the geopolitical, equivalent of a gas station with nuclear weapons, Rick. We saw a lot of excitement over this past weekend with this guy Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner group, right? The state-sponsored militia, basically, a state-funded militia, had their own office building, of all things. It's always funny how even a mercenary group has a back office, right? I mean, I guess everybody's
got a bureaucracy.
Everybody's got a bureaucracy. So they're on the march, right? They take over Rostov. They're on the way north. They're, 300 or 400 kilometers outside of Moscow.
200.
Somebody gets 200. All right. So that's 120 miles outside of Moscow. Yeah. And, they hit the brakes, and, the guy that runs Belarus is talking to Putin, and Putin's talking to him, and then Belarus is talking to Prigozhin, and Prigozhin says, "Okay, yes, I'll move to Belarus because what a lovely country it is this time of year, and all my guys will go back to their camps and sign their contracts." That's what happened on the ground, and there are so many shock waves from that still to be felt, Rick. But here in the United States, what we see is the wingers who are, the MAGA folks who are all very Putin-esque, right? Or at least Putin sympathetic. Now it's a CIA plot, right?
Well, obviously.
And so to your point about the Overton window, I mean, these guys, and I'll get to you in a second as someone who's actually written fiction for television. It's like every time reality becomes crazier than fiction, they got to go back to the writer's room.
Yeah, look, there is a very simple fact pattern here, right? Russia supported Trump. Trump won. The person who ran the operation to elect Donald Trump for the Russians in the United States was Prigozhin. He's under indictment in the United States. He has said, yes, I did that. Yes, we will continue to do that, right? So there's 17 intelligence agencies in the United States agree with this. The Republican-led Senate Intelligence Committee agrees with this. There is no dispute over this, right? So what did Putin get for this? I think he got a lot. It used to be the most consistent anti-Soviet Union, anti-Russia element of American politics was the most conservative element in the Republican Party. Now the most conservative element of the Republican Party is pro-Putin. That's the most extraordinary shift that we've really seen. It's as if Winston Churchill's party became pro-Nazi. And it's, at face value, got to be the most successful covert operation in history.
Not even covert.
I mean, really? Well, I don't know how covert it is when you admit that you do it, like you say.
When the presidential candidate asks for your help from a podium, right?
Now, so you have Tucker Carlson, who basically is an extension of Putin's state-run propaganda. You have these American oligarchs like Elon Musk that are basically supporting the same Putin position, and it's just extraordinary. And I think that the stakes then for the 24 election If Ron DeSantis, who has said that genocide in Ukraine is a territorial dispute, Donald Trump obviously is pro-Putin. If Ukraine has not won the war decisively by the time a Republican was elected, I think we have to ask ourselves, will they win that war? And it is clear that the Putin strategy is just to hang on and hope that one of these guys gets elected president. And so you have, once you look at someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's incredibly pro-Putin, wants to cut off all aid to Ukraine, that's like a loon. She's crazy. She's a crazy person. She's not a crazy person, and she could affect world history. I mean, think about that. Marjorie Taylor Greene, this little like CrossFit weirdo, steroid up freak, could affect the future of democracy in Europe. Whether or not you can drive as you can today from Paris to Warsaw, it could depend on Marjorie Taylor Greene's success in making this point.
Well, Rick, I mean,
I think there's a little good news in this entire scramble this weekend. Look, Vladimir Putin may have won the day, but he lost the war. First off, he took the most effective Russian fighting force, Wagner, out of the battlefield. They're now parked in Belarus. They're being dissolved. They're being shaken apart.
Because he can't have them put together anymore. He's got to have it.
If you're an authoritarian, you can't have two armies in your country. And right. Wagner was one. So you're going to see that their combat effectiveness is going to drop across the battlefield meaningfully. And I think you're already seeing that with Ukraine being able to push through some of these areas against the poorly trained, poorly equipped, poorly led Russian forces that are dug in hard, but they are definitely not motivated to stick around. They're definitely not feeling like they're fighting a winning battle. The other part of this is that as Putin made the fundamental mistake of any dictator, any authoritarian, he showed weakness. He compromised. He looked confused and weak for a period of about 48 hours. He's been getting a lot of blowback publicly from the right in Russia, and they're saying that he's weak, he's soft, he's given in. He should have nuked Kyiv from the beginning. And so Putin's clock is ticking. There's a chance this guy falls out of a window or drinks the wrong flavor of radioactive tea or gets Novichok or whatever it is in the coming months and weeks. And that really resets the equation, I think, also in Europe. Look, there's also a good chance that President Biden, in the course of the next year, is going to continue to expand American cooperation and NATO cooperation in Europe, and there will be a political impact of that, weirdly enough, in the U.S. Who do you believe that is a better foreign policy and defense leader? While these Republicans think Trump is this strong man, who did he bow to the entire time he was president? Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, the Chinese, the Saudis, whereas Joe Biden has been a much more traditionally American, like forward-leaning, international alliances-driven foreign policy president. He's been a good foreign policy president at a level that no one expected he'd be called on to do. So I think Biden has actually got a lot of political juice out of this to come. And I think if the election's going toward the Republicans, it will be an imperative to help the Ukrainians win the fight before the Republicans can sign the country back over to Vladimir Putin.
Can I agree with all of that. May I just say one thing that Stuart mentioned on these tech bros, these, in-state Ayn Rand people like David Sachs and Elon Musk. Can you please go back to South Africa? Please. If you want to fuck around in a country, go fuck around in your own country, right? Can you just please leave us alone, right? Didn't ask you to come. Not telling you to leave, but just leave. You can live anywhere. Live on a yacht. I don't care. Just
live on Mars.
We should throw Peter Thiel in that mix too. I just wrote this book. One of the points I make in this book, the sort of cases I make, is that the oligarchs in America actually have more power than the oligarchs in Russia. Who decided to go into Ukraine? Putin did. And these oligarchs had to go along with it. Yep. The oligarchs in America, you look at Peter Thiel, right? He looked at the 2020 election, which he backed Donald Trump, and decided the problem with the Republican Party is it's too moderate, obviously. So who does he run? He runs, J.D. Vance, his own basic party. He runs, Blake Masters.
Who's basically his step and fetch it. Yeah.
Yeah. If Blake Masters had just been one more little twist of the gene, like a normal human being, and resisted making these videos that looked like the before videos of somebody who goes out on some sort of mass serial shooting spree when you're out in the desert with guns. Blake Masters could have been elected to the Senate just as J.D. Vance was. So these guys, so Musk has more power in America than any oligarch that I can point to in Russia.
Sure.
He's controlling, a central part of national conversation. And the fact that Musk's entire business plans, entire business model is based on government support.
Right.
In America, he can oppose the government and still get that.
But it not to jump to oligarchs too directly, but another oligarch who's in the Senate right now, Rick Scott, who today came out and made one of these absurd, like posturing, chest-beating, macho Republican videos like, socialists and communists should stay out of Florida. You're not welcome here. It's the same bullshit. Rick Scott is a guy who made his billions by stealing money from the government. And before he stole money from the government, he made his billions by providing services to the government. Elon Musk. Tesla is a huge, wild success economically because the American taxpayer subsidizes each car to the tune of $7,500. SpaceX, and look, guys, I'm a huge space nerd. I love the platform. I hope it works. But it's paid for by taxpayers right now. The government is paying for it. So all this bleating about socialism from these people, it just rings really hollow with me.
Well, it does, but this is the whole point, right? Which is something that a friend of ours really got me thinking about a couple of years ago, which is these guys want power without accountability, and they want authority without responsibility. They want to do whatever it is they want to do and act however they want to act, and socialize the consequences, which unfortunately, we're very familiar with in this country, right? A very few number of people making a very bad decisions are able to have the terrible effect on tens of millions or every American citizen or every American resident. And, I think that's the thing that concerns me the most as we start to wrap up here is, I don't really care what Elon Musk has to say about anything. I don't really care what David Sachs has to say about anything. I don't remember seeing those guys, on the road when I was a 22-year-old advanced man figuring this stuff out. I don't remember these, they sit around and they talk to their other billionaire buddies about, business and stuff. Like, great. Not politics, right? Not the future of America. If you want to go, run a country, pay for more of Peter Thiel's seasteading stuff, go create your own island and have your own fucking country and leave us the hell alone. Right. But, the Joe Rogan intellectual dark web bullshit, it's enough already. Right. Like, come on. Please. Right. I mean, I think I've just about had enough of these idiots like getting out there and thinking because I've got 10 zeros in my bank account, somehow I know more than anybody. You don't know shit. You never did.
This was the Pablo Escobar theory. And I think that, that he should run the country. I think you can make a very credible case that PayPal and the accidental wealth generated has done more to the social fabric of America than the accidental wealth of cocaine did to Colombia. Right. These weirdos and freaks like Peter Thiel, who took the basic staff of the Stanford Review and made them wealthy by appointing them to jobs that they didn't really know how to do at PayPal. And PayPal stumbled into this huge success. That has had this tremendously negative effect. If anybody hasn't read The Diversity Myth by Peter Thiel and David Sachs, in which they talk about rape being regrettable.
Date rape is delayed regret.
It's delayed regret, exactly. And ask the question, why is it that men are always blamed for rape? I mean, these are the people that wrote it. And there is a thread of misogyny that runs through all of these. Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Sachs, all of them.
Now, Stuart, you're absolutely right about that misogyny thread because these guys didn't get laid in college, and for whatever's broken in their brain now, they look at women in a way that is just, It's just inverted. It's just bizarre.
But it's not, when I say it's unusual, I think it's unusual in its sociopathy and its psychology, but it's rampant, right? It is, to use the word edge case, Rick, this is a very prevalent thing amongst young, especially white men in this country right now. And these guys are their heroes.
They're the heroes.
These guys idolize, these younger guys, they idolize people like Andrew Tate, who's on trial right now for running essentially a sex trafficking ring in Romania.
And I'm sure Romanian prison will treat him well.
By the way, guys, just one other thing. I don't know if anybody's – David Sachs is kind of an oddball figure around the Elon world. But if anyone ever wants to see just a beautiful schadenfreude moment about the great genius of David Sachs, look on YouTube for David Sachs Poker. Because he's a poker player. He views himself as this like mastermind of poker. And there are video after video of this guy just getting pantsed playing cards with people. Just getting wrecked playing cards with these normies. It's like the rich guy at the table. It's a perfect proof case.
Right. If you don't know who the mark is
not always the best player.
If you don't know who the mark is, it's you. That's right. All right. We've been off on a little bit of a tangent, so let me bring us back home here. So, Rick, before we let you go, what haven't we talked about tonight that you're looking at?
Donald Trump admitting more criming on the audio tape that was released by CNN last night is a big story. Very consequential legally, not very consequential politically.
All right. And Stuart, how about you?
Well, I'm going to be really curious. I think it's inevitable that Donald Trump is going to be indicted in Georgia. As you say, when you read that transcript of that call, which you got, I mean, it's one thing to hear about it, get go back and read the whole damn thing. And what happens, he's arguing just to reverse the election. And at one point, Cleta Mitchell, as I like to think of her, Rick's attorney, picks up the telephone, gets up, walks across the room, takes the phone from Donald Trump because he's not doing a good enough job telling him how to feel the election.
Right.
Let me make this clear. My client's really not getting it right here. This is how you do it. So you're going to end up with a guy who is going to be indicted again by Georgia. And is there a breaking point here? Is it when, you used to have to win 3 states at least probably, to get a good head start on the nomination. So now you're going to be indicted in 3 states, gives you a head start in the nomination? Are people sitting around Ron DeSantis and saying, well, look, what has he done that he could get indicted for?
Listen, Ron, you
got to be careful. Be careful what you wish for, Stuart. Let me just say this. If I was... let me say this. Most campaigns like this, if you're in the first crew, you get tossed. I've been one of those. And my thing is, for just thinking about this for this week, talking about this is, the stories about the DeSantis campaign. He's not a very good candidate. All the other stuff is Casey DeSantis runs the campaign. She ain't going to take the blame for it, and he can't fire her. So you're going to start to see a whole bunch of heads rolling, whether or not they're inside the campaign, whether or not they're outside the campaign. But I would say this is also, I saw that DeSantis' super PAC attacked Peter Schorsch this week, who is a very, very well thought of, sort of political newsletter insider.
The right. Big political website in Florida.
Right. So political genius Jeff Rowe decides to attack the one guy who would be happy to attack Ron DeSantis and take anything anybody has to say about him on a daily basis. And so I think that their world pre-debate in August is in for upheaval because they will feel like they must do something to change course. It very rarely works, but I feel like that that's headed for them, and of course that will set off a whole other round of DeSantis's dead stories.
Well, and as we talked about the other day, Reed, and we'll wrap it up for tonight. Already, DeSantis's team is starting to get leaky. And they're all defending themselves and saying, it's Jeff's fault. It's Casey's fault. Yes.
Right. Well, on that note, best of luck to the DeSantises. All right, everybody, remember, tune into Rick and the Enemies List. Make sure to check out Stuart's writing, not only for Resolute Square, but also his books. And I hope that you will tune in, download, and rate 5 stars all of our podcasts, including the Lincoln Project podcast. Until next time, thanks everybody for joining us, and we will see you next week.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks, guys.